Seems like at the moment it is working for those leaders who, and you mentioned Keir Starmer, are able to flatter Trump, or indeed to bring something along, a memento, an offer of a state visit, perhaps, to try and get on his good side.
Let's begin with this horrifying story from Texas. The death toll in the floods there has risen to over 100. It's expected to rise further as the search for survivors continues. Officials have been facing questions over whether the alert system warning people of the floods was deployed early enough. There have also been questions about cuts made to the National Weather Service by DOGE, Elon Musk's department, about whether that could have contributed to the slow response. Let's start with the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt speaking to reporters about the cuts last night.
The San Angelo office was fully staffed with 12 forecast meteorologists. There were no vacancies. The San Antonio office was operating with 11 forecasters. And as Brian said, the union themselves said that there was adequate staffing. So I think those words speak for themselves.
Lara, so that's the White House there being really resistant to the idea that cuts have made any difference to this awful tragedy, or that could in any way have been in some way prevented had there not been the cuts. That's the line they're sticking to. How's that going down?
Yeah, I mean, it's really complex, but so far they have a very credible case to say that there isn't yet any evidence that the National Weather Service was responsible for the worsening of this devastation at all. There were warnings through the night on Thursday and into Friday. The bigger questions seem to be the fact that a number of people didn't receive those warnings, that the warning system wasn't adequate. So you had people who, for example, were getting notifications on their phone, whereas if you are a possible tornado victim in the state of Kentucky, for example, there will be blaring sirens which would wake you up in the middle of the night for something like this, you would hope, and that would ease the evacuation efforts. And so the bigger questions, it seems to be, are what happened in the final stage of the immediate response to this, which meant that many people didn't wake up. Many people in downstream camps were being woken by people in upstream camps to tell them about this impending disaster and the rising floodwater, particularly in the Guadalupe River in central Texas. And so you can see why Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, is so resistant to this, because in the particular case of the National Weather Service, who of course did the forecasting for this, the evidence is that they did send the updates, but B, also that this is a flash flood, and by its very definition, these things happen very, very quickly. Like the river rose, I think, 20 foot in a matter of just a few hours. So it is very difficult in circumstances like that, as a forecaster, to make sure that the people had the warnings. The reason why I think there has been so many questions about this. Well, firstly, senior Democrats like Chuck Schumer are demanding an investigation into this, firstly. But also, secondly, there was one vacancy which the union that Leavitt mentioned there did confirm, which was a warning coordinator meteorologist, which is a bit of a mouthful. But it sounds like something which would be very essential in a situation like this. The difficulty really is that in reporting about this, it said that actually the impact of that vacancy might have been quite minimal, because their role would more likely be in the kind of weeks and months leading up to something like this, organising coordination, not necessarily in the final moment. So it's still too early to say with this, but I think, Trump has previously made quite a lot of the possibility of getting rid of FEMA altogether. He said that that's something we can talk about later in the wake of this tragedy. But this has been cutting spending from these emergency agencies. And there were more than 500 people this year who left the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which oversees that weather service. So you can see why the questions exist. But so far, I think we need to be careful about saying that it had anything to do with these cuts.
Well, there's going to be obviously a lot more on that story as those searches for survivors progress. Speaking of Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to him last night saw the two of them discuss a proposed 60-day ceasefire in Gaza. And following the lead of Keir Starmer, Netanyahu produced a letter nominating Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize in an attempt to sort of chat him up a bit. Here's a clip of that moment.
I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well-deserved, and you should get it.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful. Thank you very much, Bibi.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Lara, is that just how it's going to be now, that people who visit Trump in the Oval Office are just going to produce letters saying nice things about him about stuff?
I mean, perhaps it seems like at the moment it is working for those leaders who, and you mentioned Keir Starmer, are able to flatter Trump, or indeed to bring something along, a memento, an offer of a state visit, perhaps, to try and get on his good side. So certainly not hugely surprising, but in this case, it was particularly finely tuned to what we know Trump wants, because he's spoken for many years, both privately and publicly, about the fact that he hasn't got a peace prize. And indeed, in March, when Netanyahu actually was in the Oval Office, he said, they will never give me a peace prize. It's too bad. I deserve it, but they will never give it to me. So while this doesn't mean that Trump is going to get a peace prize, obviously we'll still have that Norwegian committee looking at the nominations and building a shortlist as usual. It's certainly something that is likely to help Netanyahu get on Trump's good side.
And look, when it comes to the ceasefire deal itself, it would reportedly see Hamas release 10 living hostages, the bodies of 18 dead hostages, while Israel would be required to release an as yet unknown number of Palestinian prisoners and withdraw from parts of Gaza. I mean, Donald Trump is talking big about it, but he talks big about everything. Is there any likelihood of actual progress here?
Well, the negotiations have been ongoing, and actually on Friday it sounded like Hamas especially were happy with the terms of that proposed temporary ceasefire, but they did want some tweaks. And then after the Israeli cabinet met on Saturday evening, they said that those proposed changes were unacceptable to their mind. And Trump is now trying to, thread the needle between what is ultimately on the Hamas side, it seems, a demand for a permanent end to the war, and perhaps on the Israeli side more of a reluctance about that at the moment. And although Trump has spoken big about ending the war, in recent days he has spoken more about returning hostages, and it seems like with the specifics of this ceasefire deal. So it will be interesting to see whether they can get that along the line. We should say, of course, that Netanyahu is in Washington and will be having meetings with more figures in the Trump administration over the next few days.
Finally, Lara, we've been hearing about this remarkable story about what's been going on in LA, an immigration raid in MacArthur Park, where officers swept in on horseback and in armoured cars, marching through areas where children were playing. Here is the mayor of LA, Karen Bass, speaking in a quickly arranged press conference after those officers had left.
Frankly, it is outrageous and un-American that we have federal armed vehicles in our parks when nothing is going on in the parks. It's outrageous and un-American that the federal government seized our state's National Guard.
Lara, this seems to be the sort of ongoing, one hesitates to call it war, but not far off, that Donald Trump has with California, and particularly the cities in California, right?
Particularly the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who is something of a bête noire to many of the Republicans, particularly in the Trump administration. This obviously comes nearly a month after the initial deployment, that 60-day deployment, on which the Pentagon spent $134 billion. And that followed those immigration protests, which caused a bunch of disorder. And then Trump came down very hard on that. But it has been a very political saga in California. And in this case, it appeared that these armored vehicles and officers and troops arrived to basically 20 children playing in the park. But they will say, and indeed the border sector chief told Fox News after the operation, I don't work for Karen Bass, that's the mayor. Better get used to this now, because this is going to be very normal soon. We will go anywhere, anytime we want in Los Angeles. So they are asserting their authority and their right to do these patrols. And it's very likely that Bass and also Gavin Newsom, of course, the governor who has tried to legally challenge that deployment, will continue to do so.
Thank you very much indeed, Lara Spirit. Lara is, of course, the Times' Washington correspondent. Great to speak to you, as always.